Let's talk about is your fact finder. Fact finder is how we deal with gathering and sharing information, data. So your number, and this one is a 4. So all the results, we put in a number from 1 to 10. A 10 means you really initiate action with that. So your number in Quick Start is a 9. So you're really toward that end of the spectrum in terms of generating ideas and doing experiments. Your 4 in Fact Finder means you're kind of closer to the middle. So you're somebody who kind of explains stuff without huge amounts of data and information. It's not, if you're say a 1 or a 2 in Fact Finder, you're somebody who really just is a couple of bullet points, paint a very broad picture rather than getting down into the specifics. So you're in that mid-range, trending a little bit toward the less data and information rather than more data and information. Does that resonate with you?
It does, and it's helpful to know that they're not absolutes, that that it is like a range. So thank you.
Yeah. And I'll also note that a lot of times, depending on what you're doing professionally and otherwise, sometimes it might not resonate, and it sounds like it does with you, but sometimes we're in a position where, oh my gosh, I am required to provide so much data and information. You might be doing that all day, every day. So if I were to say to you, oh, you generally are on the less information side, you might think, whoa, that's crazy because I'm doing it all day long. We're talking about what you do when you have the freedom to be yourself, not what you're doing because you have to. So keep that in mind as we talk about all of these. Same thing with your idea generation and experimentation. I can say that's who you are. That doesn't mean you're getting the chance to do it all the time. Mm-hmm. So it could be like, well, yeah, I relate to it, but I don't feel like I'm getting to do it as much as I naturally would. And there are also different parts of your life. There's what you do in your day job. There's what you do in your personal life. And even, professionally, we can have lots of things going at one time. So all things to keep in mind. So with your fact finder, I would just guess a little bit that I mentioned in terms of how it applies to your job. Lots of government jobs, there is a ton of data that's required. Do you have to deal with a lot of data?
I do, yes. And in public health, there's a lot of data to understand.
Yep.
The specifics of the data sources, where they're coming from, how we're categorizing it. It's complex.
Are there okay, and so I want to take off on that, the complex part. That's an area where I also want to make the distinction between conative and cognitive. So complex data is a cognitive challenge. There can just be so much, and it can be difficult to understand what it's telling us because data can tell a story. That's on the cognitive side. So when I say you're a 4 in Fact Finder, it's not saying you don't have a good cognitive strength in understanding a lot of information. It's just that your natural thing isn't to gather more and more and more and more like a 9 in Fact Finder would. So I want to make sure you and anybody else who's listening doesn't think, oh, well, gosh, David said Jen is kind of mediocre when it comes to understanding data. Not understanding. That's not what we're talking about. So, but I'm curious, do you feel stressed sometimes where with your natural, I fine, I'm a 4, I accommodate that need for data, but do you feel like there are times where it just, you need to do it a lot more than is natural for you? Like have more data, share it, communicate it?
The things that I have to spend when I'm doing the data work, like today we were just working on our annual plan for a grant and really digging into what are our outcomes, what are the activities, what are the measures that we're going to use on a regular basis. And it's complex stuff. And I know the flow of it, and I can spend some focused time to really lean into it and understand it. Like the cognitive piece I can do,
Yep.
But it doesn't bring me a whole lot of joy, David. I'll tell you, I'm not real happy doing it. I have to do it as part of my job, but it's not when I'm happiest. I'll tell you that.
Well, I totally get that. As a consumer, since I'm in Arizona, also as a consumer of what your agency does, I'm very glad to see that you're there because, and this, I don't want to pick on an agency or the government. A lot of times though, organizations that do deal with lots of fact intensive, data intensive problems, and public health is one of those. They can tend to be dominated by initiating fact finders. By the way, I'm also not picking on initiating fact finders. I am one. I'm an 8 in fact finder. So I can spend lots of time doing more research and sharing it with you way beyond the point of where it's helpful. But I'm glad you're there, because when those organizations, if they become dominated by people who are initiating fact finders, they start communicating in a way that really only helps people like them. They start giving so much information, and they lose sight. It's not even sight, because that's almost like a cognitive piece. It's not that they aren't smart about it. It's just their way of doing it is, oh, let me give you more information. And at some point, lots of people in the general public are like, yeah, I don't need any more information. I actually need a little bit less. I need to be able to focus on the key things and not be distracted by the things that really aren't as important. You made your case. Let's just move on. You're somebody who will naturally help bridge those differences between people on opposite ends of that spectrum, because you do have that, hey, let me explain it to you without overwhelming you with information. So I hope that when it's not bringing you joy, one of the things you can tell yourself that's true is, hopefully it can give you a sense of accomplishment, even if it isn't natural for you, because you're playing such an important role in that data gathering and sharing process, where you cut through it and then get out the more streamlined version of it. That's important. And I hope you find times, and that'll probably give you joy when you can focus more on that, where, hey, how can I kind of weed through some of this stuff and get out the right information, the most important parts that are going to tell the story we need to tell, convince people of whatever it is that they might need to be hearing about. So that's Fact
very
Finder.
helpful.
Any questions before I move on?
No, that's helpful. And I will add on to say I oversee communications for our organization, and I find a lot of joy in that. Like
Oh, good.
taking all of the research and the information from the scientists and our epidemiologists and condensing it down into digestible bits for the public and helping to craft a press release, if you will. I think that's a lot of fun. So it's a good point.
Well, that's great. And that's a very natural thing for somebody with your fact finder talent to do. Next, let's talk about how you deal with systems, structure, organization. So that's what we call follow through. You're adaptable. You have this great strength for pivoting, for figuring out where you can, sometimes it's shortcuts, sometimes it's cutting through bureaucracy. And I would say that to somebody who's not in a government role. I know that's, bureaucracy is something that is very closely associated with government. But you have this strength in cutting through a lot of that stuff, in, finding those streamlined ways. So I talked about streamlining data. That's really about figuring out what's the core information that really is important. Streamlining plans and systems, you'll make them shorter, but yeah, you will just find shortcuts. If there's a 12-step plan and you get to step 6 and you realize, you know what, I think these next, especially if you've done it once or twice, and then you realize I can skip forward and get to where we need to be. That's what you're going to do. That's very natural for you. Now, I mentioned bureaucracy, and you are in a government role. Sometimes I'm just going to say, my guess is you'll need to take a deep breath. I'm not one to beat up on government systems. I've worked in the government in a very different role than you before. One of the good reasons they build bureaucracy is they do need to minimize kind of the downside of things. They need to minimize catastrophic failure, and public health is certainly one of those areas. It's not okay to say, hey, we have this 12-step plan to reduce the risk of communicable disease, and Jenna thinks we can skip half of them, so let's just skip half of them, despite the fact that we've been working on these for 20 years. And I know you wouldn't advocate for that kind of shortcutting of a process.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean it's easy to live within necessarily when you're the person at the other end of the spectrum. And you're nodding some, so I'm thinking maybe that you've dealt with some of that. Is that true?
Yes, there are areas where there's bureaucracy, and I can tell the redundancy of how we're including different experts or stakeholders in a process, and it's very clear why the bureaucracy exists, and that it ensures continuity of those best practices that are evidence-based. So
Right.
I see those, and very grateful that we have the folks that love that kind of work doing that work. And then there are other systems where there are bureaucracies
Yeah.
that feel like it feels like there are barriers for the sake of barriers, and we're not. I struggle to figure out how to navigate a policy or initiative forward, and that can become frustrating. So
Yeah.
it is both sides of that coin.
Well, one suggestion I can make there is because probably most of the, and let's not call them bureaucracies because that is a kind of negatively laden word.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say systems that are in place.
Mm-hmm.
When you can communicate to somebody you're working with, hey, I understand this system is very complex, very built out, and very rigid. Like there's not room for, changing this one up so much. But this one, on the other hand, serves a different purpose, and it's also very, you know, complex and built up and maybe rigid, but it doesn't serve the same purpose. So my example would be using public health. If there's a system for testing communicable diseases in a lab, well, there better be some really rigid systems in place so that bad things don't happen. It doesn't escape, or the testing isn't ruined because there's, some contamination. And frankly, you probably shouldn't be running that lab day to day.
I would never apply for that job.
Yeah, that's probably not the right role for you. And also, you're not going to go into that situation and say, hey, this system is overly bureaucratic. Let's just strip it down. Let's try something else out. Like, that would be counterproductive. But if you're talking about something else, like you talked about doing communication pieces, there probably is more room for latitude. Hey,
Mhm.
communication changes over time. The world expects, uses different language, responds to different methods of communication. So there's more, not just the ability, but really there's more need to try things out, to experiment, do things differently. But if you can help people understand why you're changing up a system, they might be more willing to listen and to say, oh, okay, I get it. I see why most of the time you wouldn't be advocating me to, do things differently. But this one, it's okay for you to do it. Even if naturally they would want to stick with what's already there rather than changing it up. And the change is really your quick start. That's the experimenting. It's the adaptable part of you with this 3 and follow through. That's, hey, it doesn't have to be planned and systematic. Well, here's another thing for you with this. You shouldn't finish everything you start.
Hmm.
That is not advice you've probably heard very often.
Nope.
By the way, I am a 2 and follow through, so I'm very similar to you in this regard. And I also initiating quick start. So especially with your combination, you're going to have all kinds of ideas that you generate, and you're going to start some of them. Some of them you just have because you're driving down the road and this thing pops into your head and it doesn't go anywhere. Like by the time you get to work, it's gone. Either you forgot about it or you realized, yeah, that sounded kind of fun, but I don't think it's worthwhile. Some of the things you'll start, those ideas, but you won't finish them. And that's quite all right. And you don't have a need to. Some people, like 9s and follow through, really have a need to bring closure to things, in an internal drive to bring closure to things, whether it's the kind of smart thing to do or whether, it needs to happen outside of them is a different story. But so with you, you don't have to finish everything. Start new ideas. And if you lose interest in them and they fall by the wayside, that's fine. Communication wise, you may need to communicate that to other people. You'll need to definitely figure out if it's something that you started and now a bunch of other people are on board and working on, and you just drop it all of a sudden. That can create some other issues with those
Yeah,
other people.
absolutely.
But if you communicate it ahead of time, and actually, this is one thing I'd suggest, especially when you're in a leadership role on projects. When you're a leadership role, you typically, not always, but you will typically have more ability to operate in the way, to be free to be yourself. So what that'll look like for you is you'll have ideas. Let's try this out. We don't have to have a whole big plan and system ahead of time. We can just dabble in it, see what's working, and then move from there and then add to it as we go. But as I was saying, you might not finish all those things. You'll start them and not finish it. So be a little careful of that with the other people and communicate which of those ideas are the things that you're not committed to finishing so that they'll also understand. Because I see a lot of people working with somebody with your Kolbe result, and they think, well, hey, every time Jenna says, let's try this out, they like, okay, you got it, especially if you're the boss and they're thinking this is an order. all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to work nights and weekends. And then they come back in a few days and, you're saying, well, yeah, that wasn't really working. So never mind. And they're totally blindsided. But if you tell them ahead of time, hey, this is something that I think shows a lot of promise. I want to try it out. Let's dabble in it for a little bit, but I'm not committing that this is going to be, something we're going to do for the next 6 months, or we'll bring it all the way to completion. So, and that's also in a bigger category of, you should find ways to be free to be yourself. You should also figure out ways to work well with other people. I mentioned before, we need people who are different than you, and my result is similar to you in the quick start and follow through. So yeah, we need people like us in those two, but we also need people who are very different. When you realize that there are those other people out there, and together you guys will get better results when you're working together. It helps. It can help you be more patient with yourself and the situation. It can help others be more patient of you when you're very different. So spot those times and try to identify when it's a cognitive difference. It's two of you who come at planning very differently, and talk to them and hand parts off and take parts from them. So when they're stuck because they're out of ideas and it's a part of a project that is in the idea generating phase, they should give you a call and lean on you, because that's so natural for you. Any questions on that? Or can you think of times recently where you maybe have been able to work with somebody who had a different strength and it was helpful?
Oh, all the time. Absolutely. And it was liberating to hear that I don't have to finish everything that I start. Like, yeah, that's right. I don't have to. And it's the idea of sunk cost sits with me a lot.
Yeah.
But it's true that there are lots of things that in the process of trying new things, I am learning and growing. So whether the project itself was successful or not, I have grown because of it. But knowing that there are folks with greater follow through or with other strengths that I work with that provide that depth, provide that full picture that I don't always have the energy or the expertise to go and get, just creates a better result overall.
All right. Well, the last one that we haven't talked about, the last action mode, is Implementer, and it's how we deal with the tactile, tangible, three-dimensional world. So the name isn't Implementer as in how you implement, carry things out. That's more like the follow through, but it's really the physical world. So you are a 3 in Implementer, which means you envision solutions. Your problem solving is less about physically constructing and building solutions, like physical building, creating stuff that you can touch and taste and feel, and more about the ideas, the conception of it. And that doesn't mean it isn't real. I mean, words are real, but they're not tactile. So like your communication style would be more storytelling with words and talking, rather than, and it's even hard for me to demonstrate because I'm also similar to you here in Implementer, but some people communicate using props, like they want to show it, not just talk about it. But you're very much a envision it, imagine it kind of person in the way you tackle problems. My guess is at work, that would be more called on than the physical parts. Is that true for you?
In this current job, yeah, we're working on our health improvement plan. It's a multi-year plan for the state, and it is a lot of that. Let's talk about what we want, how we want stakeholders to feel as they're coming together, how we want people to feel empowered to engage in this process and use this space to come up with shared goals together. And I have a lot of fun in that space, trying to think about how we're using language and storytelling to facilitate a really fruitful conversation, but also a multi-year implementation plan. It rings true.
So those are all 4 of your Kolbe action mode strengths.